Hi, everyone. It's Bob Ward, and welcome to our Boston 25 Brian Walshe Murder Trial podcast. I am joined with criminal defense attorney from Boston, Elyse Hershon. She is a veteran defense attorney. In 11 years, she has handled 17 murder cases. Elyse, it's great that you're here with us. I am so glad you're here to join us and give us your expertise on what is happening in the Brian Walshe trial.
Thank you. Very exciting trial. Lots to talk about.
Sure is. Let's get right to it. Brian Walshe, a little bit of background. Brian Walshe charged first-degree murder for the death of his missing wife, Anna Walshe. She disappeared sometime after New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, 2022 into 2023. Anna's body has never been found, and that is a defining fact in this particular case. In a surprise move ahead of this trial, Brian Walshe's defense attorneys entered a guilty plea on two of the lesser charges, lying to police and unlawful disposal of a body. That was a big surprise when that took place. Then we had opening statements and an even bigger surprise, Larry Tipton, the defense attorney, telling the jury that Anna Walshe was not murdered at all, but instead died of natural causes, and that when Brian Walshe found his wife's lifeless body in the couple's bed on New Year's Day in the early morning hours, he panicked. Here's a clip of that opening statement.
He nudged her now in a frantic and panic reaction to where she actually rolled off the bed. It didn't make sense that somebody that he had just been with and enjoyed New Year's Eve into New Year's Day would suddenly be dead.
At least we have to start with that. This idea that Anna Walshe, 39 years old, mother of three, simply died of some unspecified fatal event. What do you make out of this? Did it surprise you?
I think it was very surprising. Typically in the opening statement, the prosecution is going to lay out a chronological timeline and story, their version of events. That's exactly what happened. It was clear, it was concise, and their version is they're trying to prove Brian Walshe killed his wife, murdered her. Interestingly enough, the prosecution did not elaborate or even specify how they're saying Brian Walshe murdered her. So that's still to come. But the defense really surprised us. I think opening statements are difficult to predict exactly what is going to happen in the trial. So you want to try to be as non-committal as possible. That's the general rule. Clearly, the defense here took a left turn. They made a very bold statement. It's not self-defense. It's not a manslaughter. It was not a fit of rage in which he killed her in heat of passion. It was not an accident. They actually took all of those off the table, and their defense is an unexplained medical death. Now, without a body, nobody can prove what happened. Now, the Commonwealth has the burden, as we know, not the defense, but it's going to be really interesting to see what evidence either side has to put up as to how she died. We hear a lot about what happened before, a lot about what happened after. But what happened in those couple of hours on New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, it does. So does the defense, now the burden is on the Commonwealth, and it always is on the Commonwealth, but by the defense claiming in opening statements that Anna Walshe died of natural causes, there is no body here. Will the jury be expecting to hear something to back that up?
I think so. I think because the defense is presenting their own theory, there will need to be some evidence. I would anticipate they're going to be calling some medical experts to shine light or maybe some doubt on the fact that what the prosecution is saying is Anna Walshe was in perfect health. She was very fit. She worked out all the time. No red flags with a life insurance company. So it couldn't have happened that she had a medical event. I would imagine that the defense is going to combat that with their own medical experts. Again, likely not ones that evaluated Anna herself, but to testify generally that it is possible for someone to have a medical event that causes death without any signs, without having any predisposition for a particular illness or death.
That it just came from out of the blue. And it's going to, that's going to be a tough thing because the prosecution is already anticipating that, where they have witnesses that have testified about her health. You have, she bought life insurance back in 2021. She got the highest rating from New York Life. And they also called to the stand just yesterday a woman who worked out with Anna on New Year's Day, hours before this event happened. And that witness said Anna was in great shape and she was a powerhouse.
I mean, I'll play devil's advocate here, which is what I usually do and what I enjoy. Um, a lot of runners, a lot of marathoners, in fact, one just yesterday, have heart attacks and strokes, right? They can just drop dead on the scene. Very sad, of course, but runners are in notoriously great health, right? They're known for having a very strong heart muscle, very strong muscles, endurance runs, marathoners, very healthy people typically. They can drop dead, right? So it's not out of the realm of reality that that's a possibility. And remember, because the burden is on the Commonwealth to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, all the defense has to do is present an alternate theory that could be possible. So if they can support this theory that it is possible that she could have had an unexpected medical event, even if you don't think that's the most likely scenario, that's an acquittal. That's an acquittal of murder. So different possibilities. Again, they're going to have to back this up with experts and potentially Brian Walshe taking the stand. Although he doesn't have to, I think it's becoming more and more likely he's going to have to jump on the stand. So that's really interesting here. If they can back up that theory with believable and credible medical evidence without a body, again, a big challenge. If they can do that and create reasonable doubt, that's all they need to win this.
Okay. Want to go on to Brian. As you mentioned, Brian Walshe, we don't know if he's going to take the stand, but Brian Walsh's voice has already been heard by this jury in the form of police interviews that were conducted starting on January 4th, right up until his arrest on January 8th. The police came to his house to fill out a missing persons. And that's when Brian Walshe starts talking about the trip the emergency that Anna Walsh, he said at the time, had to respond to down in DC where her job was, that she left at 6 o'clock in the morning, got into an Uber, took a flight down to DC, and he doesn't know where she is. That story starts on January 4th and it continues. He doesn't really stray too far away from that. I want to play a brief clip of Brian Walshe from January 7th. And he, again, as police are asking more pointed questions of him, he is still saying that not only did he not hurt her, but he doesn't know where she is.
I ask you, did you do anything to hurt your wife?
No, I would never do that.
Has that ever escalated to a physical confrontation?
No, sir, no. My wife and I got along very, very well. The family doesn't work without my wife. Never hurt my wife. I mean, I loved her. What would it think? I think about my kids too. She's a wonderful mother on top of being a wonderful wife.
Elyse, the thing that strikes me in all of the police interviews is Brian Walsh's cool, calm demeanor, because he starts talking to police. When he talks to them, Anna Walsh is already dead. She has been dismembered. He has allegedly thrown her body parts away in dumpsters. And when you listen to these police interviews, he is cool, calm, and collected and lying to police the entire time. Am I making too much out of that?
I think the reason that Brian Walshe pled guilty to misleading police, which includes all of these interviews, lying, saying he doesn't know who did those Google searches on his devices, saying he doesn't know where Anna is, saying that she's missing, she went on a work trip. All of those lies, he's already admitted that he lied. So I would expect that the defense made that decision to do that before trial, so it would take some of the wind out of the prosecutor's sails, meaning that has less of a sort of a power hit to it because he's already admitted he lied. If he takes the stand here, he's going to be telling the truth. He's going to be sworn under oath. He was not under oath when he interviewed with police, or he made phone calls and sent text messages looking for Anna, even though he already knew she was dead. He, in his mind at that time, likely had put together this plan to try to protect him and his children. He was committed to that, and he would do whatever it takes to come out the other side of that. That's not happening now. He's on trial for murder. He's admitted that he lied. So now it really comes down to what happened to cause her death. Did he kill her? Did she have a medical event? Was it something else? That's really what it comes down to. The demeanor, yes, it's disturbing. It's strange that someone would be so calm, but we have to remember January 7th and then the 8th and the 9th. those are 5, 6, 7 days after she died. So he's had some time to digest, so to speak, what happened. He's had some time to think about it. It's not a surprise to him. So perhaps if he had talked to police on the first, he might have had a different demeanor. So as you get further away from the shocking event, demeanor comes down, people come down, right? So I don't think that's so far-fetched to think. We do have to keep in mind that there is a bunch of time that went by before he talked to police. And also that he was in sort of some panic fugue state.
Okay, well, next we're going to talk about those internet searches. And to me, this is a good chunk of the case against Brian Walshe. So
Yep.
before I say any more, these are internet searches that were done on a device. It looks like it was a laptop in the house. No one is saying that Brian Walshe performed these searches, not yet anyway, but in the house at the time, it was Brian Walshe and his 3 young children. The oldest child was 6 years old. So take that as you will. So the searches we've been hearing about for 3 years. I was at Quincy District Court when he was first arraigned, and we were all shocked when the prosecutor read all these into the record. There were a couple of searches that I heard this week that I wasn't very familiar with, and I think they may have been newly revealed. But just to recap, bring everybody up to speed. These were some of the searches. We can't read them all because there were literally dozens of them. And they started at 5 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day. Anna's gone. So the searches are best ways to dispose of a body, how long for someone to be missing / inheritance, how long does DNA last, how to saw a body, and one very specific search, how can you identify a body with broken teeth? At least the prosecution says that these searches that were done in the days, actually the hours after Anna disappeared and in the days following, that they are a roadmap to this entire crime. What do you think?
I think that we need to take a step back and look at what Brian is actually on trial for. Brian Walshe is not on trial for disposal of Anna Walsh's body. Certainly it's relevant and it paints a picture, but Brian Walshe has already pled guilty to that. He's already admitted essentially that he dismembered her and he disposed of her body. It's horrific, it's gruesome, it's awful, but it's not murder. This is post-mortem disposal of a body. Then we have misleading police, which we already discussed about. So what this trial is about is what happened on New Year's Eve into early morning of New Year's Day, purportedly between on or about when their friend left their house in Cohasset about, I think, 1:30, about 1:30 in the morning.
Yep.
To about, I think 4:54 was the first Google search made on that iPad mini. And I think the first search was, how do you get blood out of wood floors and how do you stop a body from decomposing? So I think it's a reasonable inference, and probably the defense and the prosecution understands the reasonable inference that she's already dead at that point. These Google searches are not about how to kill somebody, how to stab somebody, how to poison somebody, how to shoot somebody, how to kill someone and make it look like an accident. None of these searches indicate that he was trying to plan a murder or plan her killing. These are all done after she died. So first-degree murder really focuses on what was in the mind and what was the intent of the person, right? In this case, Brian Walshe, charged with first-degree murder. What was in his mind? Well, right now, without a body, we don't even know if she died by somebody else, a third party. How she died, was she stabbed? Was she choked? We don't know. Or was it an accident? Did she fall and hit her head? Obviously, we've heard the defense's theory that there was a medical incident, pulmonary, neurological, cardiac, or some other way. We don't have a body to support that. The prosecution hasn't told us what their version is of events. They haven't told us what type of death that they're proving. We don't have their theory yet.
But there are searches, there are searches that use the word murder. There was a search too about can you get, I think it was DNA from a knife, and can DNA be removed from a knife you put in a dishwasher? Those are very specific things.
And we have to understand that that knife, we don't know if that knife was a murder weapon or a dismemberment tool, as gruesome and
Mm.
hard to decide, right? And to hear that. So if he's talking, and remember at that point where he's doing these Google searches, he has not lied to police yet, but he has not disposed of her body yet. We know now, looking back, that he lied about that, and he was trying to cover up the fact that she died by disposing of her body. So in that moment, he's trying to figure out, how does he make it look like she's not dead, for, as they say, to protect the children and to protect the family, and perhaps maybe involving the life insurance payout, inheritance for the children. But this doesn't tell us how she died or that he killed her. It tells us that he's on some level a sick individual, to be able to do something like that to a woman he loves. But it doesn't tell us that he killed her. And that's what we need to remember: is first degree murder is 5 different things that the prosecution has to prove, all having to do with how the person dies and how they were killed. We don't have answers to that yet, even with these Google searches.
All right, and I guess the same applies to the photos and the video that the jury has already seen. So the photos came in just 2 days ago. The photos were from evidence recovered from a dumpster up on the North Shore. There are 2 sets of dumpsters in this case. The dumpsters that were used on the North Shore, that trash goes to a landfill. The items were recovered, and those are the photos that police showed. The second set of dumpsters are on the South Shore, and whatever was put in those dumpsters went to an incinerator. And the prosecution is trying to say that the remains of Anna Walshe herself, her body, that's what happened to her body. Went into a dumpster on the South Shore, went to an incinerator, and you're never going to find it. So the photos from the dumpster on the North Shore that were shown to the jury were graphic. We saw Anna's clothes, her jacket, her boots, her slippers, personal items, pocketbook, headphones, car keys, her COVID-19 vaccination card. There was a bloody rug that was similar to a bloody rug that Anna had her picture taken. She was lying on that rug in the house, in the living room. You see the Tyvek suit, the goggles, and most jarring of all, we see the hatchet, hacksaw, hammer, wire snips. In addition to that, the next day, the jury saw video, grainy surveillance video from a South Shore dumpster, where you see a car that looks like Brian Walsh's drive to the back of this apartment complex, and then a man gets out of that car carrying a large trash bag and throws the trash bag into the dumpster. They're not saying yet that it's Brian Walshe, but it looks like his car. The man in the video is grainy, looks like him. That's the inference anyway. You're seeing Brian Walshe literally throw away pieces of his wife. That's a lot for this jury to take in, but they have to take it in, and they have to put their emotions aside. I think it's devastating evidence, Elyse.
It's upsetting evidence. It's devastating in the emotional sense. But in terms of the case, again, that speaks to something he's already admitted to us legally in court and to the public. He disposed of her body. As grotesque as that is, and as horrible as that is in the way that he did it, they're not saying that's not him driving their Volvo XC70 or whatever the specific SUV model is, right?
XC90.
The XC90, thank you. They're not saying that Brian Walshe wasn't driving that car. They're not saying that's not their car. Certainly that's something that the jury will make an inference whether that's reasonable or not. But that still is not going to be the silver bullet in this case. They're saying the way he acted after she died is indicative that he killed her. Well, that's not what the law says. All of this still shows him dismembering and disposing of her body and trying to throw away evidence. The defense says he did that to protect the children. She had a sudden medical event, nudged her, she fell off the bed. It could have been helpful in other types of defenses, right, that the defense did not pursue. Self-defense, manslaughter, right, if he killed her in a fit of rage. That would be, I don't want to say understandable, but that would be logical in terms of, I killed her, I didn't mean to, so I had to get rid of the body. That's not what happened here, but that is a logical sequence of events. An accidental death, and then I have to get rid of her and get rid of the body, is a little bit of a harder leap. It's not an impossible leap, but it's a little bit more difficult to follow than if you concede that he was involved, or he concedes that he was involved. It seems to me he is denying completely that he has any, he's presumed innocent, right? So as of right now, he is innocent. He did not murder Anna Walsh. Can the prosecution prove this given that he got rid of the body? That's going to be the question.
You know, he could have called 911 when his wife was dead in the bed. He claims that nobody would believe him. He was facing the sentencing in that federal case, in the art fraud case, which the jury is hearing about, by the way. Could have called 911, but he didn't.
He could have. I worked on a dismemberment case back in 2016. I went to trial with another lawyer defending a man who was accused of murdering his brother. And he dismembered him. He cut off his body parts and he put them in plastic bags and put them in the storage shed on the property. Did not call 911. Like, our client testified. He testified and said, it was self-defense. There were photos of his own injuries and bruises, and he was also stabbed by his brother, the one who died. And I killed him, and I didn't mean to kill him. And then I went into a panic, a state of shock. I freaked out. I couldn't get the body out of the house. So I chopped him up. That's essentially what the testimony was. That was very difficult to hear. I'm sure very difficult to testify to. But the jury did believe that. They did not convict him of first-degree murder. They believed that he killed his brother, but it was not premeditated. Here, there's a very different tactic and a very different defense here, right? It's not that he didn't mean to kill her, it's that he didn't kill her at all. So
And
this
that
is
shows
an
that
all
the
or
jury,
nothing.
yeah, the jury can show that they can put aside these grotesque images and these shocking pieces of evidence. They can put that aside and make a ruling. And in your case, at least there was a body. There were body parts, and they saw those body parts, but they
Horrific
could
photos.
the photos. Yeah, that's what I'm sorry. Yeah, they have the photos, and they could compare what he was saying happened in their struggle to what was found. What the medical examiner found, as grotesque as that is, there's evidence, but from the body, but there's no body in this case. All right, I want to move on.
Yes.
Another key moment in this case just happened just yesterday. We're recording this on Friday, and that was William Fastow. Now, he was Anna Walsh's lover, and this adds a whole nother wrinkle to this case. And I think Will Fastow, in my opinion, this is going towards motive. So Will Fastow was on the stand, and he said that he and Anna, he's a DC realtor. He sold Anna the townhouse down in DC, and that they quickly became friends. Then they became confidants, and then, in his words, they became intimate. And down in DC, Will Fastow said that they went out on dates. They were very public, but it was important to note that they were only public when they were around Will's friends, not public when they were around anyone that knew Anna. So that's very important. But we do know, and he testified, that he and Anna spent Thanksgiving 2022 in Dublin, Ireland. The two of them got on a plane together and flew to Dublin, Ireland for Thanksgiving. So Anna did not go to Cohasset. She was not with Brian and the kids for Thanksgiving. Instead, she was in Dublin. Then they went separate paths. She went on to see her mom in Serbia, and he was separated at the time. I think he came back to the States. She also spent Christmas Eve with Fastow in DC, and that prevented her from getting back for Christmas Day in Massachusetts because the flight was canceled and she had to drive. And we know that caused an argument between Anna Walsh and Brian Walshe. I'm going to play you a little clip now from Fastow's testimony where he talked about how he and Anna talked about a possible future together.
We'd had a number of conversations about what a life together might look like, what merging two families would look like.
So Elyse, there's even more here, but let's just talk about some of those broad issues that are brought up now, and that is the trouble in the marriage. Defense has been saying that they were a happy couple, and New Year's Eve party, everything was going fine between Brian and Anna. But now we're hearing, we hear from the other man in this relationship, William Fastow. What is your take on, before we get into the events on New Year's Eve and what he testified to that, just the fact that there is an affair, that she's with another man on all of these major holidays?
Certainly, the prosecution is presenting this as evidence of motive. Motive is typically cheating or infidelity and or financial reasons for people to kill somebody. The prosecution is presenting two motives here. So one of them is the affair. But part of what would be required for the prosecution to succeed on this, presenting this as a motive, which, by the way, is not something they have to prove. It's not an element of the defense. It certainly helps to paint a picture. But they have to show that Brian Walshe knew about the affair. We don't know if he did. There's no evidence that Brian Walshe and William Fastow communicated with each other outside of around the time of the selling of the townhouse, which is, I think, before the relationship between Anna and Fastow even started. So if there's no evidence that Brian Walshe knew of the affair and the affair was secret, like you said, they didn't go out. They were not together. Fastow didn't come to Massachusetts, didn't come to Cohasset as far as we know so far. They met in another country. They met in DC, places where Brian Walshe has no ties himself. So, and also that they did not hang out with Anna's friends or Anna's family or anybody that is connected to Brian Walshe. So how do we know that Brian knew that she was having an affair? That's the first hurdle that the Commonwealth has to get over. We don't have evidence of that yet. They're saying, oh, well, how could he not have known this and that? In terms of her not being home on Thanksgiving and her not being there for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with her family, it's obviously a huge deal, affair or not. I'm sure Brian Walshe was not happy about it. He had to explain to their kids why mom wasn't there. And I'm sure he was upset about it. There's a big difference between being upset with your marital partner and killing them, a week or a month later. So again, things that could go to motive, but we don't know if Brian Walshe knew about any of this. And I think unless there's something in text messages that we don't know about yet that says that he knew, there was no confrontation that we know about between Brian Walshe and Fastow.
No.
They didn't communicate at all.
No,
So
Will
how do we know
Fastow-
Brian Walshe knew?
Will Fastow said he never physically met Brian Walshe, and he couldn't meet him because Brian was stuck in Massachusetts and couldn't leave because of this felony conviction. But there is yet another bombshell that I don't think has fully exploded yet, and that is the New Year's Eve party. So we know that it's a very small party. There's only 3 people there, other than the kids. The kids kind of float in and out. But the 3 adults there are Brian, Anna, and a friend, Jem Mutlu. Jem is also friendly with Will Fastow. Fastow said he did not tell Jem what was going on, kept it away from him. So just want to make that clear. And Jem is the last person that we know of he hasn't testified yet, but who's talked to police about the last time saw Anna Walshe alive, and that's 1:30 in the morning on New Year's Day. Will Fastow says that at about 10 o'clock, 10:30 on New Year's Eve, he and Anna started texting each other, and that she sent a photo we haven't seen yet. It's entered into evidence, but it hasn't been shown to the jury. But there's a photo of Anna, her oldest child, and Jem. That's texted to Will, who's in Idaho for New Year's Eve. And at the stroke of midnight, Anna Walshe is texting Will Fastow, Happy New Year. The key thing here is that, and this hasn't really come out yet, that's why I say this bomb hasn't exploded. In bench conferences that have been done in open court, the judge here said the jury can reasonably infer that Brian Walshe was watching those text messages in real time because he told police in those interviews that he could see messages for Anna coming in after she was disappeared and friends were reaching out to her devices saying, "Where are you? We're worried about you." Brian told the police that he could see those coming in on his devices. So the judge said there is a reasonable inference here that Brian Walshe could have seen those text messages going back and forth between Anna and Will Fastow in real time on New Year's Eve. And that the last set of text messages that have not been made public yet, there's 47 pages at least of text messages that Fastow gave to the state police that an hour and a half after that final, as far as we know, an hour and a half after the final text exchange at midnight, Jem Mutlu is the last person to see Anna Walshe alive.
Yes, so we have to remember that when there are conferences with the judge outside of the presence of the jury, they're arguing or they're having conversations about rules of evidence and admissibility. So, in order to admit something as evidence, that it needs to have some probative value and not just be to sway the minds of the jurors through emotion or through prejudice. So, obviously, text messages coming in between Anna and Fastow tell a huge story. We don't know if Brian Walshe saw those messages before she died. We don't know. Brian himself told police that he could see, because of their connected iCloud accounts, I believe, that he could see messages coming in on Anna's phone and devices after she died. Just because someone can access them and can view them doesn't mean they did. That's still what's missing here. So a permissible inference is not beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's still a huge burden here for the Commonwealth to prove. Could the jury possibly and reasonably infer, or in other words, an educated guess, that Brian Walshe saw those text messages? They could, and if so, it could be motive. There's a lot of coulds there. Beyond a reasonable doubt is beyond all possible doubt. It's not 100%, but it's the highest degree of certainty in human affairs. It's not had access to, could have looked, it's possible, reasonable inference. So the burden for admissibility of evidence is much lower than the burden of proof, right, for conviction. So just because evidence comes in, the jury still gets to look at that evidence, decide if they credit it, decide if they believe it, and decide if it fits into what the jury instructions are that they got in the beginning of the case and they're going to get before they deliberate.
Elyse, a lot of people have a lot of questions about this case. I'm in the courthouse every day. There are people who are attending this trial who just want to see it for themselves. They don't want to watch it on TV or streaming, so they're going down to the courthouse. And people are asking me certain procedural questions here. And I put it out on my Facebook page. I ask people, if you have a question, I've got one of the best criminal defense attorneys in Boston. Let me ask Elyse, because I don't always know. I'm not a lawyer. You are. So you're going to get these questions. So I have a couple of them. I have
Right.
Mary Jo Lyons Chardonnay. She asked, I heard the jurors are not being told that he pleaded guilty to getting rid of her body. Why is that not allowed as evidence?
So thank you. That's a great question. Essentially, when somebody has any sort of criminal record, prior convictions, or probation periods, or anything to that, it is not admissible in this trial or in the trial that they're on. This is a little bit different because these are charges that are part of this case. All of the evidence and the facts supporting those charges are coming in. They're coming in. They're going to continue to come in through the prosecution's case. I think that if Brian Walshe takes the stand, then it becomes fair game. So a person who's testifying in their own trial and in their own defense, the rules of evidence become much more lax because they've taken the stand. So if that's the case, and we don't know yet, these two pleas could make an appearance in that way, but they pretty much have appeared in the case, just not specifically as he pled guilty to two charges. But the defense, because he's already pled to those two, the defense cannot in good faith argue anything that conflicts with that, meaning they can't say he didn't mislead police or he didn't dispose of a body or argue against evidence coming in that supports that because he already admitted it.
So is it too prejudicial for the jury to know that he pleaded to two counts in this case already?
Yes, it's a rule of evidence that prior convictions or prior bad acts, also subsequent bad acts, it's what's dealt with in motions in limine, which is before the trial and outside the presence of the jury, usually before the trial starts. And both parties in front of a judge just are arguing and prosecution wanting certain evidence in, defense not, and vice versa. Sometimes defense wants evidence in and the prosecution doesn't. The judge makes rulings based on the Massachusetts rules of evidence in terms of admissibility. Something has to have, in order to be relevant, the prejudice of that piece of evidence cannot outweigh the probative value. So seeing in terms of a prior bad act or a subsequent or contemporaneous bad act or conviction, is not admissible unless the defendant takes the stand.
Okay, we're going to get to that in just a second. Second question I have. John Joseph Grimes asks a question, and it's a question I'm hearing over and over again. That's why I'm asking you. He wrote, "It looks as if she, Anna, told him, Brian, that day that she wanted a divorce, met someone else, and he killed her. His flimsy excuse that he found her deceased and then disposed of her dismembered body is ludicrous. Why not just take a plea of second-degree murder and get this charade over with?" So the underlying question there is, why are we even having a trial? This seems like it's open and shut case.
Well, we need to keep in mind that we have only heard the prosecution's evidence so far. So how a jury trial works, or how a bench trial or criminal trial works, is the prosecution has the burden of proof, so they present all their evidence first. Then they rest, and then the defense gets to put on their evidence. And their evidence could be photos, videos, witnesses, medical experts, forensic experts, cell phone experts, and the defendant. So we've only heard one side of events, right? We've heard what this person described as an excuse, but it's a theory of defense that Anna had a medical event and that's what caused her death. At this point, it might seem flimsy because we haven't seen any evidence yet to support it, but that's because it's not the defense's turn yet. So let's wait to see what the defense presents to support their theory and then revisit whether this is going to be a close call.
All right, what about the other part of that question, though, is why didn't he just plead second-degree murder, get this over with? What about a plea deal?
I think, I can answer that in two ways. Number one is based on the defense's theory that it's not self-defense, not manslaughter, not accident, not accidental, fit of rage killing. Brian Walshe is denying that he killed or had anything to do with Anna's death. So for him to turn around and plead guilty to any type of responsibility, second degree manslaughter, it would be unethical. So as a lawyer, we cannot have our client plead to a charge, whether it's a mitigated circumstance or whether premeditated or even accidental, if we know it not to be true. So in other words, I'm not involved in the Brian Walshe case directly, but in a case that I'd have where a client would say, I had nothing to do with this, I didn't do it, it wasn't me. And then in the next sentence or the next day or the next week, the client says, but I want to plead guilty to this, so I avoid a trial with a heavier jail sentence. I am not supposed to proceed with that plea. I need to tell my client, you've told me that you had nothing to do with this. I cannot present you in court under oath to admit that you did this. It's unethical for me as a lawyer, and it also perjures my client. It allows him to perjure himself. So you can't say you didn't do something and then turn around and say, but I'll plead to second degree. So very likely in this case, Brian Walshe, and we know that now based on the opening statement, is saying he had nothing to do with this. So if he had nothing to do with this, he can't get through a colloquy. Part of a plea is they read the facts and the defendant and the judge ask the defendant, do you admit that these facts are true? And they have to say yes, but they do it under oath and after being sworn, and it has to be the truth. Otherwise it's perjury. The one blanket rule, very black and white rule, is a lawyer cannot put on any witness to testify, including their own client, if they're going to perjure themselves or if they know that they're not going to tell the truth. So that could be why he hasn't pled guilty. The other reason is that perhaps there was no offer. Sometimes that's the case. I've had cases where I've gone to trial on a first-degree murder. My client did admit his involvement, so it's different than this case, but the prosecution did not offer a second-degree murder plea, so we went to trial.
Interesting. All right, so let's get back to this first week now is over, of the trial is over. It seems like the prosecution could be wrapping up its case in the next day or so. And then it's the defense's turn. And the big question we've been talking about a little bit here, will Brian Walshe take the stand? For me, on my side, again, you say the defense hasn't put up a defense yet, so we don't know what their witnesses are. But it kind of seems to me that they almost have to call Brian Walshe because of what they've told us that there's no one else to say that she simply died, and there's no body to be able to say that, yes, that is what happened to Anna Walshe. I think Brian almost has to take the stand at this stage.
So I do want to reiterate that there's no burden of of any defendant to testify in their own defense. Normally, or usually, lawyers tell the defendant for a lot of reasons that it may not be a good idea to testify collaboratively. That's the decision that is made. In this case, or in a self-defense case, let's say, for example, a defendant does really need to testify. In this case, we don't know if he's going to testify yet. Now, let's think about the Karen Reed trial, right? We all have been following that over the last year and a half. You've been on TV about it. I've done podcasts about it. Similar, but also different. So the defense, think about after the prosecution presented all their evidence, people were saying, why are we on trial? Like, all the evidence shows that she ran him over with the car, ran her fiance over with the car. But Karen Reed never testified, but the defense put up enough evidence for her to get an acquittal. So think about that. They had medical experts, they had a dog bite expert, they had action reconstructionist experts, they had forensic cell phone experts and to testify to computer searches and the time of those searches and text messages and phones and location. So there was more to work with because there was a body. The cause of death was both blunt force trauma and hypothermia. One is a natural event, one is not. Could it have been from a fight inside the house with the other members of the police department, or could it have been Karen running him over? So remember that Karen Reed was acquitted without her ever taking the stand. It is possible and it does happen. In this case, I think there's less to work with because there's no body and no body parts. So I anticipate, or I would expect that there's going to be medical experts. We talked about this a little earlier in the show, testifying about how somebody can just drop dead, right? Or can just pass away with no predisposition and no forewarning signs. I think there was some evidence that came in that Anna was very tired. She didn't feel well. Without a body, the Commonwealth can't prove or disprove that, and neither can the defense. So remember that the Commonwealth has the burden. The defense can rebut that if they choose to. They can put on no evidence whatsoever. But I think it's becoming more and more likely that Brian Walshe will take the stand. Of course, we all want to hear from him. I think a jury is always curious to hear what a defendant has to say, but they are asked and they have to attest that expecting someone to testify or holding the defense to the burden to call their client is something that would disqualify them as a juror. So we do have to remember that as well.
And if the defense feels that the Commonwealth has not proven its case, then there's really no reason. You're asking for trouble by putting your client up on the stand, because at that point, all the attention, I don't want to say forget the evidence, but people will focus on the person, on the defendant and what they said and how they're saying it. And it can be a disaster, or it's a risk. It could be a grand slam, or it could be a real disaster. And when you're at high stakes like this, you're talking about someone's freedom for the rest of his life. I don't know if that's a gamble you want to take.
It's obviously under very detailed scrutiny. There's a lot of pressure from the media coverage, as well as the interest, nationwide on this case. The decision to call a client is not always made until the very end. So sometimes you wait as a defense attorney until all the evidence comes in and see if there's already doubt within the evidence that the Commonwealth has presented, or if they need to bolster that with some testimony. So I don't think that a decision likely has been made yet whether to call him, but I do think it's more likely that he will take the stand than in other cases where it's just a matter of, well, they can't prove this. The defense has put up their own theory now, and I think Brian Walshe is the only eyewitness to it.
All fascinating stuff. Elyse Hershon, criminal defense attorney from Boston. Thanks a lot for joining us. And it's just such an interesting case. Brings up so many ideas here, and a lot of us are paying attention to this and trying to make sense of it all. And really appreciate your expertise here as we try to get through this. And we still have a long way to go here. I don't even think we're at the halfway point with this trial. And Elyse will join me again next week as we review that week's set of facts. So, Elyse, thanks for joining us. And you can follow me, everyone, here at Boston 25, my coverage here Over on Facebook, I try to keep up to date there, and also on Twitter, where you can find me at bward3. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.